I can't read this many books in a month because it takes too long to make these videos. What's up everyone, my name is Kelsey, welcome back to my channel. Today we are doing my May wrap up, so all the books I read in May, we're just gonna chat about them. Let's see, May was like a good reading month for me, probably because, you know, it was a break from school, so like the semester ended at the very beginning of May and classes didn't start again until today, so plenty of reading in. I read a total of 10 books with a total of 3,199 pages, which is insanity. Like, I'm looking back at the other months and the only month that came close was March, and that was 2,281 pages. I listened to 13 hours. My average rating was 3.65. 1 contemporary, 2 fantasy, 1 mystery, 2 nonfiction, 1 romance, 2 sci-fi, and 1 thriller. So we're like all over the place. Only 1 audiobook, 4 ebooks, and 5 physical books, 5 adult, and 5 YA, which is perfect. That's exactly where I want to be. Okay, so into the books. The first book I read in May was Felix Ever After by Kacen Callender. And this is a young adult contemporary. It follows our main character, Felix, who is going to this like summer school, a summer art intensive for his high school in order to create a portfolio and apply for a competitive scholarship. And throughout this summer intensive, he is like ruminating on his lack of a love life. And all of this is set off by one day he goes into school and someone has set up a display with pictures of him before he transitioned along with his dead name. And he suspects he knows who it is, so he sets up this like catfish in order to catch him and get revenge in some way, but he starts getting feelings for this guy he's trying to catch in this plot, and at the same time having feelings for other people and sort of landing in this like kind of love triangle situation. I did a whole video on this book because I loved it so much. You need to read video, but basically my pros for this book are, I don't even know how to summarize this. I loved it so much. And I feel like I'm not doing a good job of explaining it either. Like, just ignore everything I'm saying and trust me that you need to read this. But Felix is trans and black and queer, and he worries that that's too much for someone to deal with, that he'll be too much of a handful to be in a romantic relationship. So it deals with that a lot, and how we deserve love and the different kinds of love we can experience, and that not all love is going to be good for us. And it just explores those complex themes really well. It also calls out bigotry within the LGBT community, which I love to see. And there's a bit about radical, but TERF, you know, trans exclusionary radical feminism from some of his classmates. And Felix is an artist, and I have recently discovered I really enjoy reading books about artists and exploring their talent and channeling their feelings into their art. Anyways, just go check out that whole video. It does a much better job explaining my feelings, but I gave it 5 stars. It's not a surprise. Okay, the second book I read this month was Truthwitch by Susan Dennard, and I read this for the Book Push book club. It's a young adult fantasy. It follows Safi and Azalt. Shit. All right. I'll do my best. Safi is a truth witch, so she can discern the truth, whether people are being truthful or not, by looking at them. And her friend Azalt is a thread witch, so she can see the threads that bind people together. And Safi's ability is really rare and coveted, so she has to keep it a secret, otherwise people will try and capture her or kill her. And this book starts off with some political plotting requiring Safi and Azalt to flee in order to save themselves, and that's all I'll say about the plot. I guess I'll start with my pros. There aren't many. There's a character introduced kind of later in the book. His perspective anyways is introduced later in the book. His name is Aiden, and I loved him, and he is pretty much the only reason I enjoyed parts of this book. He is sarcastic and petty, and I mean, he's not the hero of this book for sure, but he is definitely entertaining. I really like Safi and Azalt's bond. They're something called Thread Sisters, which is magic I really don't understand even after finishing the book, but I liked the way they interacted with each other and the feelings they had for each other. Not romantic, sadly. But I really enjoyed the way their relationship played out. The magic system is interesting, but again, I feel like I don't have a grasp on it at all. And oh, the close combat fight scenes were great. That was one of the best parts of this book, are whenever there are close combat fight scenes, not like the big overarching battle scenes. There's like a water battle scene that I didn't really enjoy at all. So cons for this book are that there's a major character named Maroh, and I hated him. I hated him a lot. He was such a dick, I mean, such a douchebag and such a misogynist and like so full of himself. And he just like, there are so many things in this book that could have been avoided if Maroh would just had told anyone his plans for anything. And I find that really frustrating because I don't think there was any justification for keeping things a secret. It was just that he was in charge and he felt like he was the only one that needed to know the plans, so he shouldn't have to tell anyone. And that's what it felt like. There was no justification for keeping those secrets. So I only gave this 3 stars. I'm glad I got this in the secondhand bookstore because I would have been really mad if I paid $20 for this. Okay, book 3 was Beyond the Ruby Veil by Maroh Fitzgerald. This is a young adult fantasy. This is an arc that I won, and I'm so excited I did. So it follows our main character, Emanuela, who is living in this fantasy world where there is, let's see, what is the name of this? A water Kriya who turns blood into water in order to keep the citizens of the city alive. And anyone who gets this sort of birthmark spot on their skin is supposed to turn themselves into the water Kriya in order to give up their blood for water. And Emanuela has a secret in that she has this spot and hasn't gone to the water Kriya. And when she is discovered, she decides that it is not her turn and she is not willing to give herself up, and she kills the water Kriya. This is all like within the first several pages, so these aren't spoilers at all. But clearly the water Kriya is the only thing keeping the citizens of the city alive, and when this happens, she has to flee in order to survive. So her best friend Alessandro goes with her, and they leave this city, which is the Ruby Veil, outside the limits of their city. The best part of this book, let's see, what did I say? Pros. I didn't even write down specific pros. There are a lot of things I like, okay? First of all, the main character is a woman and she's power hungry, like super power hungry, to a fault for sure. This is not a hero. I don't even know if I would say she's morally gray. She's more like an anti-hero. She's your protagonist, but she's not doing the right thing. And even when she does do the right thing, it's for the wrong reasons. And I really enjoy that kind of character. Also, she experiences attraction to women. I'll be clear about that. I don't notice any evidence of her being attracted to men. Actually, I'm pretty sure the author confirmed she's a lesbian. So that's great too. Her best friend, Alessandro, is a really interesting character. He's also gay, and that's one of my only cons. I wish there were more characterizations for Alessandro because he could have been such an interesting character, but I feel like he didn't get enough page time. And I wish there were more character development for Emanuela because there's not a big change of her personality from the beginning of the book to the end of the book. There is a little, but I wish there had been more. But I did end up giving this 4 stars and I really enjoyed it. And I can't wait for it to come out so I can see what everyone else thinks. They're probably going to hate her because, I don't know. There will probably be diehard fans and people that hate her. That seems to be how it goes with women that aren't traditionally good, I guess. All right, book 4 was You Brought Me the Ocean by, oh shoot, I didn't write down the author. You Brought Me the Ocean by Alex Sanchez and Julie Maroh. So this is a graphic novel set in the DC universe following Aqualad. And this is an arc that I read, and I was highly anticipating this book because I want more queer superheroes. So this follows our main character who lives in, New Mexico? Nevada? A landlocked state for sure, somewhere deserty. And he is either junior or senior in high school and wants to go to the ocean to study. He wants to study oceanography, and he's kind of dealing with his dreams and what he wants to do versus what his mom wants him to do, which is stay safe with her. And he doesn't really understand why his mom doesn't want him to leave. He's also having like awakening superpowers that he doesn't really understand, and he's also gay and figuring that out. I actually wrote a whole review for this one so you can see it on my Goodreads, but my pros for this book are his relationship with his mom I thought was really well done, and I thought that whole narrative structure made sense and was done well. His relationship with his friend Maria started off well, but I think it kind of devolved and the romance took precedence in the second half. I never said the name of these characters. The main character's name is Jake, and his love interest, Kenny. Like, I liked their relationship. It was very sweet, but there was nothing particularly attention-grabbing about it. My cons for this book are that somehow this comic feels really, really dated, and I don't think it gave a specific date that it takes place, and because of that, I assumed it was modern day. But, like, the dialogue felt really mid-2000s, and the bullies, there were homophobic bullies that were so cookie cutter, and I don't know, I can't say unrealistic. I'm sure there are people like that, but I don't know, it felt so one note, their homophobia and hate, because Jake is also black, but I don't know, these bullies only cared that he was gay. It just seemed unlikely. Bullies tend to be like bullying all aspects of a person, but no, they only seemed to be homophobic, and that's it. It was just weird. And, okay, I'm just remembering this because I wrote this quote down. Like, the bullies say some shit like, all queers must die, in a classroom, in front of a teacher. And she just sent them to the principal's office. Like, she didn't even tell the principal what happened. Like, she was just like, that's bad of you. Off you go. I was like, in what world? Especially since this teacher was sort of framed as a good, considerate teacher. Like, she wasn't framed as an asshole that just let them get away with it. It was just confusing, and it didn't make a lot of sense. Also, I felt like Jake was really pressured to come out by Kenny, and I don't like that at all in my books. And lastly, this is a graphic novel, and I didn't really like the art style at all. I didn't let this affect my rating because I'm still pretty new to graphic novels and figuring out what is like my personal taste versus art that I just think is bad. But it really felt like the characters, like the character design wasn't consistent, and I had to use context clues just to figure out who was who. So I ended up giving it 3 stars. I'm going really easy on graphic novels because I'm still new to them. I mean, that's probably a really generous rating considering everything I just said. Okay, book 5 was Out of Practice by Kacen Tate. This is an adult romance. This is also an e-arc that I read. It follows Abby and Roxanne, and Abby owns a law practice with her 2 best friends, and she goes on vacation for the first time in years, and she's taking 10 days at a luxurious resort on an island somewhere. And on the way, she meets Roxanne, who is a writer for a bridal magazine, and they meet on the plane, and they sort of have a couple-day fling in paradise. And then they get back to the real world, and it turns out that their paths are going to cross professionally. And, you know, it's a romance, develops from there. Oops, I didn't write down my rating. Out of Practice. Oh, I only gave it 2 stars. Yeah, that sounds right. I didn't write down any pros for this. I guess I liked Abby and her partner's relationship, like her law partners, not her romantic partners. I liked their relationship. It was fun. I enjoyed their dynamic. I did not understand Abby and Roxanne's attraction to each other. It felt, I don't know, I didn't feel it at all. There was no chemistry. I didn't really understand why they were into each other. What did I write down? They're just, I didn't see them learning anything about each other. Like, on page was only them thinking about themselves with the other person and never them actually learning something about the other person. It also did that, like, really, one of those things I hate in romance novels, that cyclical, like, and it was all Abby, all the lawyer's part. She was like, I'm not doing a relationship. I don't do relationships. I'm not interested in that. And then she would catch feelings, and then she would deny them. And thus, over and over, that shit just kept happening. And I thought it was really annoying. Also, and I didn't let this affect my rating because what do I know about the Aloes? But there's this scene where it's like their first date when they're not in paradise, and Roxanne invited Abby over for dinner, and they're literally in the middle of making dinner, like in their kitchen, stuff is cooking, and they just turn off all the appliances to go have sex. And I'm like, what? Is this a thing that real people do? Because I am too ace for this shit. Like, you're gonna ruin all that food? And then the book cuts to the next morning, and one of the characters thinks about how they didn't get to dinner. Like, I'm sorry, you went somewhere for dinner at like 5 o'clock. You stopped cooking to go have sex. You had sex all night, and you didn't eat. Where are your priorities? Okay, another little nitpicky thing I wrote down was that the author kept using this phrase, sucked in her breath. Like whenever one of the women was attracted to the other woman, she would suck in her breath. Like she was so taken aback that she had to catch her breath. But it kept happening. Also, this is just one last note from me. One of the characters describes the other one as taking off a maxi dress sexily, and that's impossible. There's no sexy way to take off a maxi dress. There's just way too much fabric. I don't believe it. So yeah, 2 stars. That's a well-deserved 2 stars, I think. Okay, book 6 was The Extraordinaries by T.J. Klune. This is a young adult sci-fi, another arc that I read. So this follows our main character, Nick, who in this world where superheroes are a thing, he is a die-hard fanboy of Shadowstar, the superhero in his city. He writes fan fiction. He's the author of the longest-running fan fiction about Shadowstar and an original male character, and this original male character is just a self-insert, to be clear. After Nick and his friend are randomly saved by Shadowstar in an alley, Nick decides that he needs superpowers, and he's determined to awaken these superpowers in himself in these like increasingly outrageous schemes. And his friends are going along with it even though they object and think he's being ridiculous. So my pros for this book are, first, that the ADHD rep was amazing. It's some of the best, honestly, some of the best ADHD rep I've ever read. And there's so much of the main character like rapidly switching topics and the experience of being on autopilot, going somewhere and not remembering how you got there all the time. And finishing conversations hours after you've been away from someone. Like he'll be having a conversation with his friends in the morning and then at lunch come back and finish the conversation and no one else knows what the fuck you're talking about, but it's the only thing he's been thinking about for the last 4 hours. Also the hyperfixations, and I felt like this plot of Nick deciding he needs to awaken these superpowers and being absolutely driven by that goal with none of his friends being able to dissuade him was like a really interesting physical representation of a hyperfixation, and I liked that. Also, there's anxiety rep in here too for both Nick and his best friend Seth. That was really well done. Nick is so awkward. Like, someone help this boy function. I had to put the book down several times because I was just cringing so hard and I just could not keep reading. I needed a minute to recover. There's also a lot of queer solidarity. He is gay, his friend is bi, his ex-boyfriend is bi, he has 2 female best friends that are dating each other, and there's like a lot of solidarity in that, and just I enjoyed their friendship dynamic. There's also some interesting stuff happening with his relationship with his father. His mom died a couple years ago, so beware of that. There's a lot of talk about his grief and dealing with that and sort of repairing the relationship with his father because it kind of fell apart after his mom died. So that was, I mean, I don't have any personal experience in that, but it felt genuine. I also want to say that this kind of gave me like a little bit of Sky High vibes. Like it's not a superhero high school, but it gave me that kind of like teenage camaraderie around superhero abilities. So that's something to consider. I gave it 5 stars. I really loved it. I do want to mention though, considering the current climate of the United States, that Nick's dad is a cop and they talk about his job a lot. So that's something you should be aware of if you're going into this. All right, did I already say I gave that 5 stars? I gave it 5 stars. All right, book 7, The Sundown Motel by Simone St. James. This is an adult mystery. Obviously, I own this one. It's a book of the month book. It follows 2 timelines. So one is Vivian in the 80s who has left her hometown to go to New York, but really she just wanted to get out of her hometown, and she ended up in this small town called Fell and took a job as the night receptionist at this motel. The second timeline follows Carly, who is her niece, however many years later, 30 years later, investigating the disappearance of her aunt and trying to figure out what happened to her because the investigation was just kind of dropped. Starting off by saying that I originally thought this was going to be a thriller, like super suspenseful, kind of tense read, but it's definitely not. It's really a mystery and it's slow build for sure. But once I got over my expectations, I ended up really enjoying this. Let's see the pros. The mystery was really interesting. There's some super realistic, but also some paranormal mixed in. So you're kind of questioning what's real and what's fake and what's actually happening and figuring out which of these clues is real information. and I love that kind of mystery. I'm super into paranormal kind of books. There was a point, like 3/4 of the way in, that I thought I had this shit all figured out, but it just kept getting weirder. I think this would be a great fucking TV show. Like, if someone adapted this show, I would watch it hands down. Other pros were it really captured like the fear of living as a woman, because obviously this is a woman in 2017 are investigating the disappearance of a woman in the 80s and looking into the disappearances of other women to see if there are any similarities. And there's like a lot of discussing that general fear you just have as a woman walking around or doing anything and how concerned you have to be. And I think that it captured that really well, which is not a surprise because it's written by a woman. I didn't write down any cons, but I guess I would say that it is a little slow. Like, the first third to half of the book is definitely slow-paced mystery, and it doesn't really pick up until the second half. So it took me a while to get into it, but I ended up enjoying it. So 4 stars. All right, book 8 was Creativity Inc. by Ed Catmull. This is an adult nonfiction. I listened to this audiobook from my library, and Ed Catmull is I'm probably saying his name wrong. Anyways, he's the president of Pixar Animation and Disney Animation Studios. And this book was sort of a combination management advice book and memoir, sort of, but more of a business memoir. It's not so much about his life as it is about the founding of Pixar and how they got where they are today. My pros for this book, first of all, was that it was super entertaining, especially if you're into animation at all, as like a watcher or a doer. And it was just so interesting to hear about the history of Pixar. And of course, I watched these movies when I was a kid, but I didn't realize how groundbreaking they were at the time. So it was just cool to hear about that. But this book also has like management advice and how to encourage employees to be creative and bring new ideas, and how to manage like a creative team in an innovative way, in a way that encourages innovation, I guess. And I think he did that really well. Like, there are some really good ideas in there and some things to keep in mind if you're in any kind of leadership role and you want to foster creativity. Some things I specifically liked were that it touched on considering your employees' personal lives and how not everyone is going to have the same personal circumstances, and that's something you have to take into consideration when you're evaluating their work. And the value of an employee is not just how much time they give you, it's their creativity and what they're putting into the work and the quality of work they're giving you. And I just really enjoy that because I think that's something a lot of employers take for granted and don't consider, especially when promoting people. He also really encourages self-awareness and self-study and looking at the policies you have in place and being prepared to constantly make change and evaluation. He also really encourages communication and an interactive workplace because, and he goes into this a lot in his stories, and everything in this book is sort of tied into a story where you can get inspiration from all different kinds of fields. Like, you don't just have to put all of the designers together and all of the writers together, because everyone can constantly feed off of the creativity of others and be inspired by their work. So yeah, it's safe to say I enjoyed this book. My only cons were that he spent a lot of time talking about Steve Jobs because he owned Pixar, but there are so many things about Steve Jobs and the way he works and communicates with others that were the opposite of what Ed is advising. So it felt weird to spend so much time talking about the communication style of Steve Jobs, even though it's not what he suggests. But still, I really enjoyed it. I ended up giving it, and I forgot to write it down, 4.5 stars. 2 more books to go. So book 9 was Pretty Girls by Karin Slaughter. This is an adult thriller that some people might have heard of just because it has a reputation for being especially brutal. I borrowed this book from my boyfriend's mom, and even she warned me that it was super fucked up. So I don't know how to explain the plot of this book, so I'm just going to read the back because there's so much going on. It says, it's been more than 20 years since Claire and Lydia last spoke. Claire is the glamorous trophy wife of an Atlanta millionaire, Lydia a single mother dating an ex-con. But neither has recovered from the disappearance of their sister Julia 2 decades earlier, and the shocking murder of Claire's husband brings the horror and heartbreak of the past roaring back into their lives. The vanishing of a teenage girl and the killing of a middle-aged man almost a quarter century apart. What could connect them? As they form a wary truce, the surviving sisters unearth the secrets that destroyed their family all those years ago and find the astonishing truth where they least expect it. Okay, pros for this book. So this is my second Karin Slaughter book. The other one was, I think, The Good Girls. I think that's what it was called. and I enjoyed that one as well. And Karin Slaughter writes really good, really interesting sister relationships, especially not good sister relationships. And I think she really nails that. I don't know how to say it. And my sister and I have a really good relationship, so it's not like I have a tortured sibling relationship to go off of here, but it feels like a genuine sibling relationship where they have this kind of knowledge of each other because they've known each other since they were born, and there's all that history between them, but there's also animosity from whatever tore them apart. So I think Karin Slaughter is really good at writing that family relationship. Very intense and compelling storytelling, really vivid writing. Sometimes too vivid in my opinion, but the mystery itself was really good and really interesting, and it kept me hooked, and I thought the end was really satisfying in like a revenge plot kind of way. My cons for this book, these are in random order. They're not in order of importance by any means, but there's a lot of misogyny in this book, like super casual misogyny from everyone, especially authority figures, but even from like the good guys, like their dad writing in his journal, just like the kind of casual misogyny that's like protecting your daughters from men and saving their virginity and shit like that. There's an FBI guy in this book that is super creepy and such a douchebag, and I just don't understand why the character was written that way, because that seriously, that cannot be a good strategy for gathering information from anyone, especially women. So I don't understand why. I don't understand how a person like this could become an FBI agent and be successful in any way, because no one would fucking talk to him. Like, there's no way. So that didn't make a lot of sense to me. Just to be aware, there are a shit ton of trigger warnings for this book, and I'm going to start for every book trying to put trigger warnings in the description box for all of them, but this one especially, please read them before you read this book, because there is torture, like a lot of torture, sexual violence, rape, a lot of everything, and it's definitely described. It's not off page, and I felt like, and that's why it's in the cons, like I felt like a lot of it was unnecessary. Like, it didn't need to be on page for it to adequately affect the characters. It felt like it was really written for shock value, just to shock the readers, and that's it. There were also weird abandonment of some of the plot threads from the beginning of the book, like Lydia's beef with the moms at her kid's private school. Like, all of that buildup felt worthless at the end of the book. Also, there's this weird correlation that she kept drawing because one of the suspects has OCD, and I hated the way she wrote about his OCD. First of all, there's one scene where Claire, his wife, says that his OCD manifested in ways that any wife would love. Like, he would keep the house tidy and take out the trash every night, and like, gross. Also, they kept drawing this correlation between OCD, meaning you have to be in control of things, and making that kind of weird correlation to would rape people. And I don't know where the fuck that is coming from, but I didn't like it. So, I don't know. The mystery was good. I ended up giving this 3 stars, but holy shit, be aware of what you're getting into, and be aware that there are some not good things as far as like actually representing human people in this book. Okay, last. Book 10. So You've Been Publicly Shamed by Jon Ronson. This is adult nonfiction. I read the ebook from my library. This is actually recommended to me by Linda at A Crimson Daisy, I think. I'll link it below. Anyways, when I did my quarterly goals update video, I mentioned that I was behind on my nonfiction goal, and she recommended it in the comments, and I ended up enjoying it. This is a nonfiction book about public shaming, and sort of it goes into the history of public shaming and why it is so devastating on the human psyche, and it also has specific case studies, or really just people that have been publicly shamed, or people have attempted to publicly shame, and tells their stories and the effect it had on them. Okay, so pros for this book is that I actually really enjoyed all the sections where he's talking about and interviewing people that have actually been through this and hearing their perspective and how it affected them. I thought it was really interesting and also kind of sad. Public shaming is like one of my worst fears. I'm absolutely horrified by the idea of thousands of strangers on the internet talking about me like in a negative way. It's horrifying. So I definitely see why public shaming is so effective as a punishment. Oh, hi there. Okay, I love you, but wait, I can't right now. All right, I also especially enjoyed the section on like courtroom preparation. There's this whole section towards the end that talks about like prepping witnesses and experts on how to deal with shaming from interrogators. Like, I thought that was fascinating because that's a real thing that happens in courtrooms today. So my cons for this book are that I didn't think it was super cohesive, especially in the second half. Like, the first half had a very clear transitions from one section to the next, and it made sense. But into the second half of the book, the case studies were more frequent, less in depth, and I felt like it felt really broken apart, really choppy and hard to follow because of that, and that made me kind of lose interest in sections, so it took me a while to finish reading. But I did end up giving it 3.5 stars, and I thought some of it was really interesting, so I'm glad I read it. Okay, whew, those are all the books I read in May. That was a lot. If you've read any of these and have comments, please leave them down below. Or if you want to keep talking, you can find me on Twitter at Kelsey Reads or Goodreads at Kelsey Lynn Reads. If you like this video, hit like. If you want to see more, subscribe. I post book-related videos every Wednesday. I did that backwards. But oh well, I'll see you next week.